Good evening. What if we could put our local food pantries out of business?
Yes.
This sounds radical, even a little uncomfortable, but stay with me here. What if these spaces, instead of being a repository for overprocessed and commoditized foods, became the heartbeat of our communities? What if they were places where food was gathered, preserved, and shared, where local farmers could convert their fresh produce into items that would sustain them through the winter? What if community came together not out of desperation, but out of connection and an interest in cooking, canning, and creating meals rooted in their region's abundance? What if these spaces were determined by us and not by policies set by people hundreds or even thousands of miles away? Let me tell you a story that grounds this in something real. This is a story about Jean. She was a young mother of two about 30 years ago. She had a fantastic job as a paralegal. She had good benefits. And yet each month, after paying her car, her rent, her utilities, she would find herself counting out her change jar to buy food at the end of the month. And here's the thing. There was a food pantry in her community, but it was largely seen as a space that served the disabled or the homeless, and Jean could not imagine taking food from those she felt deserved it more. She was doing everything right, and yet she still felt it wasn't enough. Jean was a growing number of American families who have been falling out of our middle class and into what the United Way calls ALICE. This is asset-limited, income-constrained, and employed families. These are people who go to work every day. They are our nurses, our teachers, our mechanics, our landscapers, our retail workers. And yet, increasingly, their wages are not keeping up with what they need to sustain themselves. Housing, childcare, healthcare, food. Jean did what many of us would do in this shame-filled and uncomfortable space. She hustled. She stretched pasta instead of buying meat. She kept her head down and worked her way up. Eventually, she returned to school and set aside even enough money to buy the small row house next door that she was able to rent out for some extra income. However, all the while, she knew that she was just one emergency visit away, one major car repair away from undoing all of it. Even after the U.S. began measuring food insecurity in the mid-1990s, the rate has consistently remained between 11 and 13%. It ticks up a little bit during a recession, and it goes down a little bit during an economic good year. It doesn't really move. And this belies the real truth of the matter, and that is, since 2020, our food pantries are serving 20 to 30% more working families every single year. Let me be honest here. We are trying to solve a 21st century food crisis with systems put into place after World War II, systems that continuously put profit over people. Several years later, when Jean's children were moving on into high school, she was reminiscing with her neighbor, Susan. They were talking about when their children were all little, and they would literally pass them across their shared fence to each other for play dates. Jean shared something that she had been secretly harboring for nearly a decade. She said to Susan, "I wish I could have done more. Maybe if I could have stayed married, I would have given these kids a better life." Susan said, "What do you mean? These children are loved. They are happy, healthy. They are surrounded by family and friends." And Jean said, yes, but there were times when I was counting my pennies to buy food. And Susan said to her, we did that too. And we were a 2-parent household. We stretched eggs and mac and cheese more times than I could count. And then it hit Jean. She hadn't been failing. She wasn't alone. She was simply trying to get ahead in a system where the math doesn't add up, even for the hardest working among us. And this is what we're seeing more and more of today. Working families struggling to put healthy food on the table. Meanwhile, there are those who are making it work, but they think it's not happening in my neighborhood, on my block, where I live. Maybe not here, but somewhere over there, across the river, across the state. But it's next door. It's people we know, and it is people we depend upon. If we can agree, even in principle, that access to healthy, affordable food is a human right and not a privilege, we can begin to build systems that reflect that truth. Dr. Gabor Mate writes in his book, The Myth of Normal, when so many of us are struggling, it is not a sign that we are broken. Let me repeat that. When so many of us are struggling, it is not a sign that we are broken. It is a sign that something in our culture or in our environment needs attention. These systems are speaking to us. People feel shame when they need help. Not because they are doing something wrong, but because capitalism has shaped our food systems in ways that disconnect us from each other and the land that feeds us. Here is what's wild. In our tiny little state of Connecticut, we grow and produce an enormous amount of food each year, and an amazing diversity of it. It is beef, pork, poultry, seafood, dairy, eggs, fruits, vegetables. It is tens of thousands of workers on over 5,000 farms. It is a $4 billion a year industry. It is so much food we can't even quantify it in one unified way. The issue here is not scarcity. It is capture, storage, and distribution. Oddly enough, 22, maybe 23% of our state's waste stream is food, and most of that is actually edible. It is food thrown out by restaurants. It is food lost in processing, left unharvested in fields, tossed because of confusing expiration labels. Families struggling to put food on the table at the same time while we were throwing food away, that is not irony, that is our call to action. Thankfully, we are seeing what's possible when communities step up. Food hubs like Brass City Harvest, Grow Wyndham, Fresh New London, Real Food CT, New Britain Roots, these organizations are just among some that are leading the way. They are growing food right outside their door, even in urban spaces. They are reconnecting people to the land and to each other. They are leaning into crops resilient to climate change. They are doing what our large-scale industrial food systems can't. They are being adaptable, flexible, human. Meanwhile, our national news is laden with stories of what happens when things don't work. Millions of animals euthanized when there's a disease outbreak. Food left unharvested or winding up in our landfills. Empty grocery store shelves in a crisis, not because there is not enough food, but because the distribution systems are rigid and fragile. These food hubs were formed not because someone did years and years of research or formed or wrote some extensive 300-page report. It's just simply that community members came together and said, we can do better and we can do it together. If we want to prevent large-scale future food loss, we need more food grown locally, more cold storage, better distribution systems, and more people overall involved in this work. We are being handed an opportunity in this moment right now to create systems that work for us and not against us. So imagine a food pantry that is not a clearinghouse for unwanted grocery store items, for corn, soy, and wheat products that often leave us feeling sick, but instead a thriving kitchen, storing produce grown right outside, where the farmer brings his produce and converts it into products that sustain us and him through the off-season, where people come together to cook, preserve, and dine together. Jean didn't qualify for SNAP. She tried, but she made too much. Yet a food pantry that looked like this, a food hub in her community that served their needs, would have changed everything for her family, for her neighbor's family. And there's not one solution that's going to fit every situation, urban and rural. What works in Hartford is not going to work in Windham. What works for Bridgeport might not serve Litchfield. But regional food hubs designed by us can meet our needs. Here is what you can do today, right now, to help Connecticut's residents have access to healthy, affordable food. Support your local growers and producers. Sign up for a farm share. Shop a co-op or local market. Join an organization that gleans produce so produce does not get left behind in the field. Use electronic tools like Hungry, Too Good to Go, Food Rescue Hero, which allows you to divert food that would otherwise wind up in our waste stream into usable products. And finally, contact your state rep. Let them know that you support pending legislation right now, an act reducing barriers to food security. This funded bill died last legislative session simply from lack of attention and testimony. Yet it supports universal school meals, food is medicine, and many other programs. If we can transform our pantries into food hubs, we don't just feed people better, we save money, we reduce waste, we support our farmers, and most important, we build healthier and more resilient communities because the next crisis is coming. The bottom line is that access to nutritious and affordable food is a human right, not a privilege, and we are brave enough and connected enough to build a system that works for us. Thank you.